Thank you for joining United Way today for Avoiding Eviction, a community first conversation. Each Friday, United Way hosts a series of conversations where we bring our Facebook Live platform to you and talk about topics that are relevant, hopefully, to you. We engage a group of community heroes. We hope that you'll hear stories of hope, thoughts on recovery, and aspirations for a more equitable future. Today, we'd like to start by introducing to you three of our panelists. Steve Flores from the Rhode Island Legal Services, Sharon Morris from the Omni Development Corporation, and Courtney Smith from United Way 211. At this point, I'd ask Steve, if you'd start, just give a brief explanation of who you are and what you do.
Sure. Thank you, Kyle, and thank you for having me. It's a real pleasure to be here. I'm Steve Flores. I'm the Director and Managing Attorney of the Housing Law Center at Rhode Island Legal Services. At the Housing Law Center, we do all things housing, which includes defending tenants from evictions, and also on the foreclosure side, working to stop foreclosures. But at RILS, we also have a number of other departments so that we can help people in need with all of their legal needs, all of their civil legal needs. And really happy to be here and have this discussion with you all.
Great. As you heard, our platform, our forum is called Community First. Can you tell us what that means to you?
Sure. To me, it means that, we're all in this together. And when, especially in the housing context, when you take the broader community into consideration, as opposed to just looking at individual interests, usually you can get to a better result.
Great. Thank you very much. Sharon, I'd like to ask you next. Please share who you are, what you do at Omni Development.
Good afternoon. Thank you for inviting me today to speak on behalf of Omni Development Corporation. I'm the Executive Director at Omni Development Corporation, and we are affordable housing developers in the state of Rhode Island and Connecticut. We provide low and moderate income apartments to residents throughout the state and in Connecticut. We provide housing to handicapped, elderly, disabled, and formerly homeless, as well as families in affordable housing. So we have a lot of housing throughout the state. We have about 984 units of affordable housing. In Providence, we have about almost 500 units in the city of Providence alone. So we are a large organization, and we're affordable housing providers.
I wanted to say congratulations. I understand that Omni has been awarded a redevelopment contract for the Barbara Jordan 2 complex. So thank you very much for your time and perseverance to put the application in. The community has been desperate for additional apartments, so we know what you're going to bring to the table is substantive. So thank you. If you would tell us what Community First means to you, that would be great.
Well, Community First, like the old African proverb, takes a village. So working collectively with the community, utilizing resources to help improve the conditions of those young people and families that need us to be able to move forward in life. So when you're part of a community, you pool collective resources to improve things for others. And United Way does that. And Omni, as affordable housing providers, we do put the community first when we're developing housing. So that's something that I'm very passionate about. And it's something that I know was one of the key factors with Omni being selected to redevelop Barbara Jordan, because the community was the focus of that initiative that we're trying to hopefully execute soon.
Great, thank you very much.
Thank you.
And we appreciate all that you do. Courtney Smith, feel free to tell us who you are and what you do at 211.
Thanks, Kyle, for having me. My name is Courtney Smith. I am the Director of 211 here at United Way of Rhode Island. 211 is United Way's Health and Human Services hotline. We assist Rhode Islanders from all walks of life with things from basic service needs to elder care, to food pantries, to COVID-related now things that we're helping with. We're available by phone, by chat, by text. And in pre-COVID and hopefully post-COVID times, we also have a pretty robust outreach program where we're out in the community meeting people where they are to provide services.
That sounds like a lot. Can you tell us what community first means to you?
To me, community first means putting the community at the center of everything that we do and working outward from there. It's the ability to adapt our support to the needs of the community first in a really purposeful way. It's community before self. And it's also providing equitable access and opportunities for all Rhode Islanders to be able to receive the access to benefits that they need.
Oh, that's great. It seems as if we've already gotten our first question from the audience. So thank you so much for those who are out there watching and listening. We appreciate you. And the reason we bring this forum to you is so that you can ask questions and we can get the answers that you need to be solvent and to stabilize your lives, but also so that you can continue to prosper and realize your dreams here in the state of Rhode Island. And I'll just read the first question, and it may be directed to you, Courtney. I've met so many people over the last few months who reached out because they're struggling, because they haven't been able to get unemployment relief and or rent relief to pay rent. And now they're facing eviction. What will you all and United Way do to help these many young families and unemployed workers to avoid eviction and get the relief that they need?
I can start from an intake and assistance portion. So we're talking with folks all day, every day. We know that there are a lot of people who experienced a delay in receiving their unemployment insurance, a delay in stimulus payments, and that there was some considerable unemployment fraud as well. And so that puts people behind to start with, right? And so that sort of starts our effect. So we are working with people to connect them to our fabulous community partners who are providing things like rental assistance. But also, during our assessment, we're talking with folks to see if there are other things that they might be eligible for, thinking outside the box. Are there other resources that we can connect you to that can provide you, with rental assistance? We've been working closely on those, but also, what are your other needs and what access do you need for things like food, utility assistance, and other things like that, if there is a little bit of income coming in, so that you can move that around the best that you can. But we've had some great community partners that we're working with who've been able to provide some assistance to the community, and we're really trying every day to get those folks connected.
At Rhode Island Legal Services, we sort of take the same holistic approach. With evictions, what we're trying to do is increase our capabilities because we fear that eviction numbers will be on the rise and soon. But one of the things we can do at Rhode Island Legal Services, because we have a number of other departments, including benefits, is once a client gets into our system, we don't just focus on the narrow legal issue that the client has self-diagnosed, but what we try and do is link them up with our other attorneys who can help them, and also with other non-legal service providers like 211 who can open up doors that we can't do as lawyers. So we are trying to bulk up our eviction defense capabilities, but we're also trying to help people in both legal and non-legal ways by directing them to other places they can go for help. We know how hard it is right now.
And how about you, Sharon?
Well, as a landlord, we're actually not changing anything than what we normally do. We are affordable housing providers, and that's the population that we do work with. And since I've been at Omni, we have resident services coordinators at some of our developments, but the managers right now that, I send them weekly, I send them updates of services that are available to our residents. And so we always do anything that we can to help them remain stable. They're only, if a resident gets evicted from one of our developments, unfortunately, we've exhausted all of our resources. We work with them. We provide them payment. We do whatever we can because it's basically cheaper for us to keep the resident than for us to displace them. And usually, because there are issues once they're displaced, it affects other things of their life. So that's not what we're in the business of doing. But the reality is we will have some evictions, unfortunately, because some of those tenants are not following up on the olive branch and the resources that we are trying to share with them. So Steve, you know kind of work that I do. So I'm really, we work with the residents first before we even consider, evictions. So that's the last resort, but it's the reality. It may have to happen.
Thank you. There's another question. What protections are in place for folks who've been paying full or partial rent, but whose landlords are still ending their tenancies because they're on a short-term or month-to-month lease? We've been hearing from lots of folks in this position from who rental assistance may be helpful or may not be helpful, and they still may be at risk of losing their homes.
Well, I can speak for Omni. We are taking partial rent payments. We're taking whatever a tenant can pay if they're showing good faith efforts. Unfortunately, I'm thinking that people that they're talking about must be private landlords, and they just want to rent the apartment, and the tenant may be at the end of their lease term. If they're on a month to month, then they must have fulfilled their contractual agreement. But what people have to understand is, as a landlord, there are other issues, not necessarily monetarily, where the relationship has to come to an end. We have some tenants that may be paying their rent, but unfortunately, everything else they're not following as part of their lease. So we have to look at the full picture. That's a very generic question, but I think as a landlord, I'm a private landlord and I do affordable rentals, but we have to look at the big picture, and it may not just be because their lease is ending. I don't really know if that answers their question, but there are other reasons why a lease can come to an end.
Thanks. That's important to think about. We always think of the end point where someone is homeless or without a place to stay, but there are always many, many factors in the equation, and we know that organizations like Omni and many, many others, as well as private landlords, are doing their best right now. And at the same time, we recognize folks are strapped because very few people have been able to pay the rent that's owed due to a loss of income. I think about the state of Rhode Island, and as we approach having 300,000 unemployment claims filed, the number's over 280,000 since March 1st. 180,000 of them or more, 182 as of yesterday, were COVID related. Those numbers are staggering. If we have about 500,000 people in the workforce and almost 300 of them have filed for unemployment, we know that there are issues that we're going to face, and housing is certainly going to be one of them. Steve, I know that at Rhode Island Legal Services you all are doing more, but to the listeners' question, the viewers' question, I'm wondering if there are protections in place that help tenants right now who may face eviction simply because they have a month-to-month arrangement or on a short-term lease.
Sure. And just one thing before I answer that, to put your unemployment numbers in context, and they are jaw-dropping. Those numbers that you just talked about, when you compare them to all of 2019, it really puts it in perspective. For all of 2019, the entire year, Rhode Island had less than 20,000 unemployment claims. So you're talking about, multiples in just a couple of months. But to get to the specific question about termination. So a couple of things. I think these probably are private landlords because there still are some CARES Act eviction protections out there that will remain in place, I will say at least through the end of July. And our courts right now won't even hear what I'll call a CARES Act eviction until you can't even file it until July 28th. But, as Sharon points out, there are a lot of reasons why a landlord might choose to end a tenancy. And I think what I'm hearing is the question really is, hey, I have the money or have some of the money, but my landlord won't take it and they're terminating my tenancy anyway. And that's unfortunate. It's more than unfortunate, especially in the middle of a global health pandemic. But what are some protections? from a lawyer, from a legal perspective, I would say, there are technical requirements that the notice has to meet. Right now, because of COVID, courts are slow to schedule evictions. And while I like to see tenants and landlords always work things out, if a landlord is determined to end a tenancy and get someone out, they can't do that without evicting you. And an eviction requires a judge to say you're evicted. So if your landlord is saying to you, you got to go on August 31st, and they put that in the notice, that may be the date in the notice, but you actually don't have to go until a judge tells you that you have to go. And so there's a legal process that has to play out. And what I see all the time is, tenants don't know that only a judge can evict you. So the landlord says, you got to be gone by August 31st, and they go. But there's a legal process that has to play out. Right now, that legal process is moving more slowly than it typically does. So that's one thing to keep in mind. I realize it's sort of cold comfort, but it is one thing that can buy tenants more time. And lots of times, landlords make mistakes on their notices, which can mean they have to start over.
Great, thank you. One of the reasons that we strive to avoid eviction is that we don't want to see folks that are homeless. United Way is a member of the Homes RI Coalition, and I have to say and give props to our team that leads this initiative at the Housing Network of Rhode Island. You have done an amazing job at spearheading the community, really, to pull together all sides of the housing equation, from the Community Development Corporation, community advocates, as well as funders coming to the table to design and execute on housing strategy in partnership with our elected officials. So, props to them for sure. They're certainly leading the way. But when I think about one of our partner agencies in the Rhode Island Coalition for the Homeless, as of 2018, we've seen some data that's just staggering. Whenever I look at data, I look at it first as a Black man to see where I fit in the data, and then secondly as an employee at United Way. Part of my identity as a Black man is that I'm a father, I'm a husband, I'm a son, I'm a brother, I'm an uncle, and I think about all the people in my family, my life, that are immediately impacted. And then I also put on my United Way hat and think about it from the organization's perspective. When I look at homelessness, which we had been on a pretty steady downward trend up until 2018, 2018 over 2017, we saw a decrease by 4%. I'm like, so everything seems to be going in the right direction. And then when I look at it again as a Black man, I find it impossible to believe that Black people are 5% of the population in the state of Rhode Island and 28 to 29% of the population in the homeless community. And I wonder, just asking you all, what are some of the things that we can do to, one, continue, post-COVID, certainly, to continue to decrease those numbers as they relate to homelessness, and then with an acute attention to Black people and Black men in the homeless system, how do we design and support strategies that help to eliminate this from our community at all, but certainly to reduce the disparity that exists?
Well, I can speak as an African-American woman myself, and I am an affordable housing provider, but more importantly, the folks that are providing housing access and opportunities, it needs to be diverse. When I came over to Omni, we're led by a woman of color, but the staff at our developments did not represent the diversity that I would have liked it. It was either white or Spanish, okay? And unfortunately, as seeing you speak about the disparities, the Black community is being discriminated, in my opinion, discriminated against from two different populations that should have been serving the residents. And so I am very passionate about that. I've had to have conversations with a management staff person about that. I was very straightforward with her, and that this was happening. And so we have to be honest, and we need to have this real conversation because it exists. It didn't just start with George Floyd. we've been living this life, living in this skin and experiencing this discrimination for a lot of years. And unfortunately, in Providence, the minority communities are kind of, in my opinion, intentionally pitted against one another. Instead of it being the community, we have service providers because we have a large Latino population, and that's great. And I grew up in Providence. It wasn't an issue when I grew up, so it's sad to see it now. And I'll call on it. I'll call on, I don't care who it is. If I see it, I'm going to call someone on it. And if we're servicing a population based on needs, skin color should not matter. And if I see it, I'll call a person on it, and I continue to try to serve. And when you talk about the African-American males who are homeless and chronically homeless, I see the African-American families as well. One thing we do try to do is give people a chance. I had a situation with Steve a few months ago. We had an African-American woman moving into one of our housing developments. And maybe at first, if I was an African-American woman and I'm denied housing in North Providence, I might think it's because of my skin color. So when it was brought to my attention, I'm like, I would love to meet with this woman, and we need to have the conversation, because when someone's denied housing, they need to be an advocate for themselves, because there's always a way that you can correct whatever issue it was that may prevent you to get in. This woman, she took the initiative and took care of the barrier. When she came and she met with us, that was actually a recommendation that I was going to make, but she already took the initiative, and now she's living in an affordable apartment community in North Providence for seniors. So initially on the surface, it may have just been, I'm being denied housing by this white woman because I'm Black and I want to move in North Providence, but that wasn't the case. But we were able to get through that. And so housing providers and homeless service providers, you have to help your clients advocate for themselves. And when you're bringing them to apply for apartments, help them remove the barriers, save them time while they're waiting to get into an apartment. Work on financial management, work on paying off that past due utility bill. Don't set them up. And I'm not saying that's the case for everyone, but I've seen it as the case. And I'm like, why would that caseworker even send that person to that apartment knowing they have these past due balances? It hurt me to the core. So now we're saying no to this person because they have this barrier. So there are so many resources that are available. Like Omni works with accessing homes with the AmeriCorps volunteer. We have resident services on our sites to help the tenants once they're in there. But our goal for the Barbara Jordan development is to try to help people before they get into the development and while they are continued residents to continue to provide services. So we have two approaches: helping them be good tenants at the time of application and helping them stay in good tenant status to prevent any further evictions. So that's my comment to that, because it runs deep with me. So I'm very, very passionate about that.
Thank you, and I appreciate your passion, and I also appreciate your call to advocacy even more. As an advocate, I anytime we can empower people to be better advocates for themselves and give them the tools to be successful, I'm right there. So thank you, Sharon. Steve, I saw you ready to hedge in. If you'd like to weigh in. Yeah.
So listen, I know this is being recorded, but I'm going to say it anyway. I wish everybody could be like Sharon, because I do have firsthand experience with working something out with her, and she did it right, and so, I was grateful for that, grateful to get her ear. But to answer the question, what can be done? I think one of the things that can be done is, just looking at pre-COVID, right? More than 90% of tenants go into district court with their housing on the line without an attorney. And landlords almost always have attorneys. So one of the things we can and need to do is change that situation, because that situation hits Black and brown folks disproportionately, right? So if you can keep people in the homes that they already have because they're not going to eviction court without counsel, but they actually have some help, I think you can go a long way towards the homelessness issues that we're seeing, because lots of people end up there simply because when there were times in the system where they could have and should have gotten some help, they weren't able to access that help.
Thank you. That's critical. I think the numbers that we saw were even more staggering than the description you just shared. Somewhere in the range of 97% of landlords who go to court have legal representation, yet only 3 to 7% of tenants have the same representation. So, it's almost as if you stack the ball or stack the game in favor of the landlords. And it's not stacked from that perspective, but because tenants are already struggling to pay, in some cases, they don't have an additional 3, 4, 5, 7,000 to hire an attorney. They can't compete in the same way as landlords can. So we know there's more that we have to do. In other communities, they have forced legislation that will guarantee, similar to other courts in the state of Rhode Island, where there is some representation made available for tenants who come to court. And we want to continue to work on that. We know that's part of the agenda from the Homes RI Coalition. United Way has also taken this up as part of our housing policy agenda. There are a couple of questions in the chat box that one, Steve, they asked you to speak more about protections against retaliation and threats from landlords. But there's also a question to ask, what has United Way done to motivate the governor and General Assembly to pass an eviction moratorium or provide additional rent and eviction relief? I love to say that United Way and the Homes RI Coalition and others who've been at this for some time have solved the problem. We haven't. We have been working closely with the governor and her team. In fact, for those of you who are still around at 1 o'clock, the governor will have an announcement today that we hope brings some additional relief to the community, and United Way has been at the table with that as well. But we don't think that it's our charge alone to hold our elected officials accountable. What we do believe is that we work with the entire community, everyone that's willing to sit down and rationalize a solution to this problem, and then be the best advocates we can be while we're challenging the greater Rhode Island, 1.1 million people, youth, young adults, older adults, seniors, and everybody in the middle to always advocate. And to that end, I'll ask you right now, call your state representative. They are wrestling with the financial bill for the state of Rhode Island for 2021. Call your senator, particularly if they're on the finance committee. They are looking at investments to support affordable housing right now, and your voice and your vote in November and September can weigh in significantly. Call them and tell them that you're their constituent. Call them and tell them that affordable housing is important to you. Call them and tell them you cannot shelter in place if you don't have a place to shelter. Call them. This is critical, and we need your voice. It's not just United Way. And while we're happy to take the lead wherever we can, and we do, we step in every single time we can, whether it means a sacrifice to our staff or our other priorities. However, we need your help. We need you to be an active participant in this advocacy game. Today, call your state representative. If you don't know how to reach them, it's simple. Go to the Secretary of State's website, sos.ri.gov. You can find out your state rep, your state senator, your city councilor, your U.S. congressman or woman, your U.S. senator, any elected official that represents you as a Rhode Islander, you can find on that website. So thank you for these questions. I really appreciate them because United Way has been working on advocacy for a long time. And our goal really has been to empower you to be the best advocate you can be, as Sharon said. So thank you. Steve, I don't know if you have any other thoughts on additional protections for folks that might be facing landlords that are trying to use self-help evictions or make other threats. But if there's any resource out there, certainly we want folks to call 211. But if there's anything you can highlight today, that would be helpful for our audience.
Oh, sure. I'm happy to do it. So retaliatory evictions, which I think you mentioned a moment ago too, they're prohibited by the statute, by Rhode Island law, as are self-help evictions. So your landlord can't do that, shouldn't do that. I realize it still happens all the time, right? But a couple of things that I want people to know about. Our Attorney General in early April put out some guidance to law enforcement and a press release about that guidance that reminded or underscored with law enforcement that self-help evictions are not only a civil issue, right, between the landlord and tenant, but they may also lead to criminal problems for the landlord as well. And I am grateful to the Attorney General for making that statement, reminding people that self-help evictions should never happen. Because let's face it, right now, if that happens and you put somebody on the street, you're not only putting that family at risk, which is bad enough, right? You're potentially putting a whole community at risk. And it just should not be happening. And so if it is happening or you're getting threats, you can call Rhode Island Legal Services or Center for Justice, because we want to know and we want to put a stop to it.
That's awesome. There are a few questions that are coming in fast and furious now. Can anyone on the line discuss the link between utility shutoffs and homelessness and supporting a fair payment system based on income?
I think with the utilities, when you say, I can speak on when we're trying to assist people who have had their utilities turned off. It's important, I keep talking about advocacy. But that's just what I want people to help the tenants or the clients advocate for themselves. But the utility companies, sometimes they do want to be aggressive in the beginning, but if you work with them, they just usually require a down payment. So some of the service providers should definitely keep that in mind. Like a down payment is generally required, and then ongoing payments to help get the utilities on, because that's also a barrier for us when we're renting to tenants, because if they can't get utilities on, then that's an issue. So if someone's been homeless for a year and they're working with an agency, the agency should be helping them to remove those barriers, helping them get their utility bills in a pretty manageable status where they can turn on the utilities hopefully when they find a place. But right now, I think the moratorium is still on or maybe ending. But I know, like with a family member received their sewer bill. These service providers, they know they want some money as opposed to no money. So if you have a past due bill, call them. It's the same thing with rent. You have to call to take the initiative, and people are really listening now. No one wants to be that bad guy during this COVID crisis. So you have to help the tenants advocate for themselves to try to make some payment arrangements as best they can right now. Not doing anything is not going to solve any of these issues. You really, really have to just try to take the initiative and at least communicate with them. If they're not working and they don't have money, they need to communicate that to them and let them know, and provide the support and documentation. The lines of communication is very important during this time, and people are really willing to work with you if you communicate with them.
Great. Thank you, Sharon. That's very helpful. For those who are asking, we're happy to share after this recording is complete, a list of scripts. If you like some verbiage to be able to call your state rep or senator, the Homes RI Coalition has prepared an entire packet. So we'll be happy to post this on our Facebook page or link you to their page. Again, it's Homes RI. It's on Facebook. You can go there anytime, and there are lots of tips and tricks to not only connect with your elected official, but to actually make the case. There are data points, there are scripts that you can use, and certainly the links that will help you connect with the individuals you seek first. So we'll share that after this is complete. But thanks for that question. Courtney?
Yeah, no, I just want to say, I think that goes back to the point I made earlier about treating people holistically. When people come into 211, they may come in with one specific need, but as we're talking to them, we're discovering that there are probably a couple of things that they're working on that could be linked, that may not be linked, but they could all be seen as barriers. And so as we're talking to people on the phone, we are discussing things like, what benefits do you already have? What does your income and family demographic look like? Because are there things that we can identify that you might be eligible for that you're not already seeking because you may not know? Oftentimes, working with the PUC or working with the utility companies, they don't always advertise that, there are programs that you can enlist in that can help with the cost of your bill. And so I think all of this sort of goes back to systemic homelessness and treating people not just with a Band-Aid, but making sure that you're meeting all of their needs and making sure that they're getting access to all the benefits that they may be eligible for, that can free up maybe even a little bit of income that they do have coming in to pay for other resources. So I just wanted to make that point, making sure that we're treating people as a whole and talking about all of the needs that they have and trying to remove as many of those barriers as possible. And that's, really what we try to do at 211.
Thank you, Courtney. That's helpful. The title of this discussion really is avoiding eviction. And we've heard some helpful strategies already. Certainly, seeking out legal counsel, and Steve mentioned Rhode Island Legal Services, the Center for Justice is two of our premier organizations that provide this type of service. Coming from the landlord, the property manager, the landlord, the owner's perspective, Sharon has said, begin a dialogue. If you don't have the full rent or utility, reach out to your landlord or the utility company and talk to them, engage them in a dialogue, and let them know that I might not have 100%, but I can pay 75% today. And if your utilities are shut off, begin the dialogue so you can establish a rapport with them and get them turned back on. You're going to need a down payment, so you can't call them a zero. You have to have something, and then be prepared to make an additional payment over time to ensure that your arrearage is paid in full. And as Courtney said, from the service provider perspective, really think about the folks that we're working with. They're not just a number. They're an entire person, so treat them in a holistic way and ensure that we're not just meeting the need they have today, but really assessing and supporting the entire person and the need they may have tomorrow and next week and next year. Again, our questions come in. There's one question I think is relatively important, and it's not about preventing eviction, but what happens after eviction, particularly the self-help evictions. What can a person do if they leave their home and come back to find the locks have been changed? All their belongings are inside. They no longer have access to the apartment. They were not served a legal notice authorized by a judge, as you mentioned, Steve. What can a person do in this case?
What they can and should do is, I know the governor expressed interest about this. You call the governor, call us, call Center for Justice, and you can also get in front of a judge, even without a lawyer. There are forms on the district court website where you can get in front of a judge, let the judge know what happened. If it's a situation where it's a self-help eviction, the judge can and should order the landlord take the lock off. It doesn't always go down the way it's supposed to, but you can get in front of a judge on an emergency basis pretty quickly. And you don't need a lawyer to do that. But just remember, there are a lot of folks who are interested in this, right on up to the top of the executive branch. So let people know.
Thank you. There's a question specifically for you, Sharon. As a tenant organizer, I've had to deal with landlords who use the tenant's call for help as the start date for the eviction process. What does one do in response to such bad faith?
Well, unfortunately, I that's not a practice that we do. So I unfortunately I can't speak to wrong. But as a tenant organizer, when the tenants are experiencing issues, they still should reach out to the landlord. That's the only way that they're going to be able to, take the initiative. So you reach out to the landlord. If let's say it's July, you're not going to be able to pay July's rent. Let them know as soon as you know. Steve probably can talk about the process about, the 10-day demand notice goes after a certain time of the month. You still have time. If it's a long-term issue, then you should put it in writing, have a conversation, and then go from there. But if it's just a short term, we barely try to take a tenant to court for being 1 month behind. I tell the managers it costs us more money to take it to court than to try to give the tenant the time to try to work through that issue. So that's, again, since I've been at Omni, I've been a very strong advocate for tenants and trying to help us work with them, because we can't be affordable housing providers. We evict tenants every time they have an issue. But if the tenant takes the initiative and works with us, we're all there to try to help them. So for us, that's not them sharing what they're going through is not doesn't start the process for us to evict them. So I really hope that the tenants continue to advocate for themselves. But in these cases, sometimes you have to put it in writing and CC someone else so that you have the paper trail. Never have these conversations about your livelihood. Never have a verbal conversation if you're concerned about that. Always follow up with something in writing if you have a verbal conversation, or start the conversation in writing. I'm not sure if that answered your question, but I hope that the tenant will continue to be an advocate for themselves.
Yeah, that's helpful, Sharon. Thank you. And we understand that certainly isn't your practice or that way you operate as a human, but definitely not the practice at Omni. So we appreciate you. There's a question, Steve, about the forms. I believe forms if you're facing a self-help eviction. I believe those are the pro se documents on the Rhode Island District Court website that you were referring to.
The court website, you go to district court, and there are a whole bunch of forms that you can access online. And I just want to echo what Sharon's saying. It's true that, if you have the wrong landlord, right, it's true that you're taking a risk if you're telling them, hey, I'm going to be late this month or I have an issue. But I think overall, without question, the right thing to do is to be proactive and take that risk, because I think most people, especially people who are acting in good faith and are acting rationally with their own economic interests in mind, they'll work through something with you, and they would appreciate a reach out instead of having to chase you down and figure out, why the money hasn't hit. So I agree with Sharon that you may take a risk, but you're better off engaging and starting that conversation.
Thank you again. Those forms are on the Rhode Island Courts website. If you just Google search RI Courts, you can select the district court, and then there's a forms tab, and you're looking for the pro se motion document. So we'll post this again on the website later, along with the scripts for folks that want to call their landlords or tenants. And if anybody's on the line, if anybody's listening that has a link and would like to share that in the chat line or comment section, please do. We'd appreciate your help as well. I know Jonathan Lax was on earlier and Ray Nerix was on. I heard Ray talking to me through the waves of emotion. But we want to ask a question now, thinking about our time as we begin to wind down from each of your perspective. If there was one thing a tenant could do to begin or stave off the process of eviction, what's the one thing you would recommend they do today? And Courtney, I'll start with you.
Sorry. I would have to echo what our other guest said in communication, whether that's, reaching out to Rhode Island Legal Services, reaching out to your landlord, reaching out to 211. If you're not sure where to start, we can help you with that. We can help you get connected. But proactive communication, I think, is probably the first best practice.
I think that's it. And sometimes people come to us too late. Sometimes they don't know the other resources, non-legal resources, rental assistance that they can access. And sometimes they're not talking to their landlord. And you should do all of those things. And so I agree. If there was one thing I could say that had the best chance of helping you avoid eviction, it would be communicate.
And as someone who sat in the manager's chair, who sat at Rhode Island Housing, who sat at the investors table, and now at Omni, the communication is very, very important. But more importantly, a lot of the affordable housing communities that exist, they have resident services coordinators. They have service coordinators that get paid to assist residents. And one of the things that Omni is trying to do through Access and Homes, this year we're trying to enroll to get another resident services coordinator who helps with eviction prevention. You sit down, if residents reach out to the manager's office, the resident services coordinator, their job is to get a copy of the tenant rent roll every month, contact every tenant that's delinquent on their rent. We take that initiative to contact every household that is delinquent on their rent, reach out, try to schedule a time to speak with them to help them set up a budget, try to come up with a individualized plan to help them stay in their housing. Believe it or not, we've had some residents that participated in that, and then some residents who did not. So they have to be their best advocate. There are resources that your owners and landlords provide that can help you, that's trying to help you become, keep you stable in your housing. So if you live in one of the affordable housing communities, I encourage you or your clients to reach out to their resident services coordinator. And then also they have tons of apps that help you get back on track. And like Steve and Courtney says, sometimes the tenants should just reach out just to learning how to become a good advocate. And, we try to put that in our newsletters. So we're not perfect. There's always room for improvement. But hopefully when we start doing our next round of leasing up, we're trying to start that from the beginning, trying to help the tenant before they move in, establish these good practices. So it's advocacy, advocacy, advocacy.
We know that, again, this is not the end of the discussion. We continue to work with all of you and look forward to additional partnerships. Certainly we'll be tuned into the governor's announcement at 1 o'clock today or shortly thereafter. But if in your final word, if you could issue a call to action to a landlord, to a tenant, or to a community member, what would that call to action be? What do they do to help the larger community or specific individuals avoid eviction?
Communicate. Just try to communicate and just try your best. That's all we really ask for.
Courtney or Steve, anything different?
I would agree with Sharon. And if you don't know where to start, you can always call 211. We're happy to get you connected.
Thank you. This is wonderful. I'm going to share my three because I can. The first is call your state senator today and find out if they're on the finance committee, because we'd love for them to hear from you. Call them today and tell them how important affordable housing is. Pick up the phone, get on the website, find their phone number, call them. Don't send them an email, don't send them a letter, call them, let them hear your voice. You may get a staff member today, but let them know that this is important to you. Secondly, we have 2 elections left in this 3-election season. Make sure that you're registered to vote. Go on the Secretary of State's website, sos.ri.gov. There's a number of different versions, but that one will get you to where you need to be. Find out whether or not you're registered. See where your polling location will be. Check out whether or not you want to get a ballot in the mail or you want to go in person to cast your vote. Make that decision today. Don't wait until August and then try to figure it out for September. Make it today. And then the last thing is vote. Make sure that you are completing the vote this year. Don't just do the steps. Vote, bring 5 friends. Tell 5 friends and then bring them along. And I'll add a 4th because we have a little bit more time. Complete the census, please. We need you. We need you because we know you count, and we want the federal government to recognize that as well. If you don't complete the census for yourself and everyone in your household, those dollars that support Rhode Island will not come on your behalf. So call your state senator, call your state rep, register to vote, ensure that you're registered to vote, vote, and then complete the census. Those are my 4 calls to action. So thank you very much. It was a pleasure having you, Steve, Sharon, and Courtney on avoiding eviction, a community conversation. And I thank you for the time and dedication that you provide for the Rhode Island community and look forward to continuing to work with you all. Have a wonderful weekend.